everyone who is attending live to our first ever MYOS MD Power Panel. Today, we are going to be talking about maintaining muscle health while losing weight. We'll specifically be diving into GLP-1s and how we can support patients on GLP-1s with nutrition. So as people are coming in, please feel free to drop in the comments, where you're tuning in from and do you see patients on GLP-1s or, do you know people taking GLP-1s? We'd love to understand a little bit more about who's in the audience. All right. We can give people about 1 minute to start trickling in, and then I know time is of the essence, so we can get started. How are you doing today?
I am doing great.
Amazing. Okay. So as people are coming in, let's see. Yes, we have some things coming in on the chat. Yeah, so as people are coming in, please put in, where you're tuning in from. And, you can also start with any questions that you have for us. We have a few prepared questions on our end, but then after that, we will go straight to the chat to answer any questions from people attending. Okay, it is 1 after. I know time is of the essence, and this will be recorded. So anyone who RSVP'd yes to the event will be receiving the recording. So let us hop right in. So Dr. Chris Meletis, please introduce yourself. I know you wanted to go by Chris today, but just for the formality, wanted to introduce that this is Dr. Chris Meletis. He's a naturopathic physician. Would love to learn a little bit more about your background and what inspired you to focus on integrative and naturopathic medicine for your career.
Well, thank you, Dr. Swathi. I started my life in conventional allopathic medicine, finished my first 2 years at basic sciences, and met a gentleman that double dared me to check into naturopathic medicine, and voila, here I am. So that's kind of the short and long of it all. But it was actually in conventional allopathic medical school that I was taking my one class, requisite class in nutrition, and this was 88 to 90. And I also had biochemistry and pharmacology all at the same time. And I was learning about nicotinic receptors, and I was learning about the biochemistry of the NAD pathway. And I asked my professor of nutrition, I says, can a doctor focus on nutritional interventions? And voila, here I am, focus on nutritional interventions. So that's kind of the long and short of it. And now going to work on my 33rd year of clinical practice, this topic of muscle and muscle loss, I identify with it. And I've seen my patients, which were grandparents and great-grandparents, and now I see their grandkids and their great-grandkids. And yeah, getting old is not for sissies, and I can attest to that myself.
Yes, definitely. And that leads me to my next question. So as you've gone through your career, you mentioned you've experienced it yourself, you've seen patients go through it. How has the management of muscle health and overall wellness evolved over the years?
I think we're more aware. There's what I call the 3 M's: muscle, mitochondria, and microbiome. Microbiome gets play all the time. The mitochondria is definitely forefront and lots of research there. The muscles has its day too, so I call it the 3 M's: muscle, mitochondria, and the microbiome, and they all interplay so integrally. And so muscle mass, now we know, is associated with, if you're lower your muscle mass, you have greater mortality. In fact, there's a statistic that if you have a smaller arm, you actually have up to a 54% higher mortality. And I had heard a lecture 2 or 3 years ago that your lower body was absolutely totally essential. It was given by a chiropractor naturopath combo. And she talked about how working her lower muscle literally saved her life from falling into a storm drain that someone had moved the lid from. But she said, but in addition to that, it's also doing all these other wonderful things. So I think that muscle, if you think about it, it's where a lot of our mitochondria is at. It's active metabolic tissue. And that's where we're tying to some of our conversation later on. If we lose that active metabolic tissue, OMG.
Yes, absolutely. And now, that you've discussed that, and, I'm sure you have many conversations with your healthcare provider peers, how aware do you think those healthcare providers are about the role that muscle health plays in the overall health, well-being, and longevity of patients? And, particularly as that pertains to patients who are 40 and above, and patients that are on medications like GLP-1s?
Yeah. So I think it's coming along. The microbiome's got, like I said, lots of play. Mitochondria gets lots of play. The muscle is slow in the uptake, and it's really a tremendous area of need to appreciate the myokines, which we all know that term, but also exerkines. So to think that probably our largest hormonal tissue in our bodies are muscle, and we don't think of that. And I often give my patients this example. Why is it so important to carry your muscle? I said, well, if you go outside, and I'm here in Oregon, so burr. And I think you're actually recorded from Toronto, so probably even a double burr. And so it's like, well, what happens if I go outside and I'm just wearing a dress shirt? Well, I'm going to shiver. Well, what's that shivering doing? Well, it's causing thermogenesis. I'm creating heat. Well, what do we always do? And for the last 30 some years of my clinical practice, we try to stimulate thermogenesis to help support weight loss. But now we lose our muscle along the way, getting older, the aging process, anabolic resistance, which we'll probably talk about a little bit. And it's like, wow. And then our GI tract's not absorbing as well. They say by the age of 60 that we have about 50% of populations hypochlorhydric, low stomach acid, or achlorhydric, or maybe you're taking an acid blocker. All these things are feeding into muscle loss, which is altering our metabolism.
Yes, and you kind of already started talking about this, but I want to dive in even further. So, what are some of the consequences that you've seen when muscle health is overlooked in this patient population?
Definitely increased risk of metabolic syndrome and diabetes. We know that exercise and also breathing through our nose, very important for nitric oxide production. And we also find that a body in motion stays in motion, a body at rest stays in rest. And so all of us as clinicians had to go through our requisite physics, and we kind of vaguely remember that. And it's something about Newton and an apple and 9.8 meters per second squared in gravity. But it's like kind of like, well, that whole metabolic activity. But if you've been sedentary, you're less likely to change your habits and your patterns, and you're also deconditioned. And that deconditioning becomes a really big issue. But then I have patients which have been ahead of the curve, so to speak. I have a husband and wife, Don and Jeannie. He was a physicist at the local university, a PhD, and she's a chemist, and they're in their mid 80s. Until recently, they were both doing between 7,000 and 10,000 steps a day. And Jeannie is just a delight. She has a little smartwatch, and she says, it doesn't give me credit for doing a flight of stairs when I climb the neighborhood hill. So I have to scooch down, raise my hand up, and then all of a sudden I get credit for that flight of stairs. But they usually try to do 35 to 50 flights of stairs a day. However, both of them, so they got their 7,000 to 10,000 steps and their flights of stairs, but both have taken falls, and both have injuries, and both have been placed by me on Fortetropin, which we'll chat about, and exercise routine, and they're going to the physical therapist. But sadly, Don recently cannot put one foot in front of the other and stand without listing to the right or left because he had broke the head of his femur. So it's like we're having to rehabilitate him in his older age. And thank goodness he's well conditioned, but of giving some extra tools is going to give him that giddy up and go to keep on doing those 10,000 steps.
Yes, definitely. And, that is amazing information for the aging population. And now if we shift gears to, GLP-1s, can you talk a little bit about the rise of GLP-1s and, what healthcare providers need to be mindful of when patients are on these medications?
And the GLP-1 fad, and it's working very, very well. And of course, it's driven by pharma to a degree. But prior to that, a decade ago, it was the HCG diet. And so everybody was injecting with HCG or taking HCG sublingually. And then they were doing a 500 calorie diet. And they lost mass amounts of weight, but then they would regain their weight. So this for me is deja vu. So my patients are losing a lot of weight, and then all of a sudden they're becoming the skinny fat. And so that skinny fat concept is interesting because we see this also with bariatric surgeries. And I actually have a good friend, actually two good friends. They're husband and wife now. They're boyfriend, girlfriend. They're both in their mid to late 60s, and they finally got married. And both have done it. And they're a fraction of who they used to be in terms of girth, but they're also not very strong, and they've taken tumbles and falls and face planted. And now, as we get older, what don't we want to do? Break something, take a tumble, knock ourselves in the head. And so now all of a sudden, we're going to become more likely to be sedentary. But the research shows that with GLP-1, because it has such rapid weight loss, like bariatric surgery or previous ACG supplementation and medication, through a compounding pharmacy, that up to 38% muscle loss with GLP-1. And that was actually done through a DEXA study. And, DEXA is not the perfect anthropometric measure, but it's a measure of like, wow, we're losing a lot of muscle. So now let's say it was me and I was losing all this muscle. At the same time, I'm losing all this weight. Well, the scale's happy. It's quick. We're kind of living that society. But then I stopped the GLP-1 or I stopped doing something else. And now I don't have my metabolic active tissue to be mitochondrially driven and thermogenic. And now all of a sudden I regained the weight. And I had one patient and they had lost 50 pounds, 45, 50 pounds. They stopped the GLP-1 and it all came back. And happens to be a healthcare provider, 6'5", ex-football player, but he had, through his life of being busy and being a dad and all this, started loading on the weight. So he did the quick, and then he stopped. And we know yo-yo diet's not good for any of us.
Yeah, and that quick fix is something that's not going to last, and that's something we've seen time and time again with the studies that, once patients are done taking their GLP-1s or they think, oh, I've achieved my weight loss goals, then they stop taking it, and then there's the rebound weight gain, unfortunately. So with healthcare providers, staying on this topic, how can we help patients mitigate this inevitable muscle loss when they're on GLP-1s?
Well, you put it beautifully, Dr. Swathi. We all want the quick fix, including me. Okay, I want the quick fix. And it's like, if all of a sudden I can wave the magic wand and the scale's telling me things I want to see and hear, well, no, that's very tempting. But the challenge is nothing's for free and nothing's simple. And so we lose the muscle mass, that's a problem. But then we're losing a lot of fat stored toxins. And so we lose fat stored toxins, xenoestrogens, forever plastics, all these kind of things. And everything else we've stored from transplacentally while you and I were in utero, and the whole audience and all our patients, we know that, I'll share an example. A young man that's still my patient, when he was 4 or 5 years old, lets you know how old I am, and now he's in his 30s, he actually had a lot of mercury in his body. But his mom had all these mercury amalgams. This little guy had no mercury whatsoever, didn't eat tuna fish sandwiches, but transplacentally, he got burdened. And so the concept here of supporting the mitochondria, the microbiome, but also realizing that we have to get rid of the toxins. And that's what we in functional medicine call the Bristol stool chart. And it goes 1 through 7, and you want to be a 3.5 to 4.5. And if you're not, you're basically reabsorbing muddy water, and we're being kind and mixed company here. But we don't have to exercise. So even though I'm doing let's say I'm doing, but I'm not, a GLP-1, well, then all of a sudden, that doesn't mean I can just skate on the exercise. I need to be maintaining that muscle mass. Then I have to make sure I'm getting free amino acids and sufficient protein, because it's something called anabolic resistance as I'm circling the age of 60. It's like, it's not as easy to gain muscle mass, and it sure is easy to lose it. So if I don't go to the gym for a while, it's like, wow, medical word, I'm feeling wambly. I don't think there's an ICD-10 code for that. But then, so we got the protein, we got the exercise, resistance training, supporting a detox, lots of water, fiber, those kind of things. And then a multivitamin, strangely enough. Multivitamin is really, really important, because the whole idea of a GLP-1 is you're not going to be eating as much. And so if you're not eating the calories, but you're not also getting the micro and macronutrients. But then the other big thing that I incorporate with my patients is Fortetropin, which is from MYOS MD, and is a special egg yolk that's fertilized out of Europe. And it's incorporated because, as we're going to talk about, I'm sure today, the studies on lean body mass and protein conservation and so forth, phenomenal. So I do the multivitamin, I do the detox, I do the resistance training, and of course, plenty of sleep. But I also add Fortetropin, and it actually has done a remarkable job already with my patients using it.
Amazing. I'd love to double click on Fortetropin and hear a little bit more about, how Fortetropin works in the body, and, what are some of the studies that back up its use?
Well, probably the one that's funnest, if there's such a thing as fun, when we dive into peer-reviewed literature. And I'm just finishing my 19th book, which is on fertility, and that fertility is not just conception. We know that's a whole nother reflection of how toxic our world is, that we're not as fertile as we used to be. But when you double click, as you said, on Fortetropin, you find 6 clinical studies that have been done, including double-blind placebo-controlled studies showing efficacy. And the one I like the most is what I call the Berkeley study. I like them all, but the Berkeley study showed a combated anabolic resistance, that inability to be as anabolic. And that's just not merely testosterone or DHEA or male and female alike, but it's also about the fact that as we get older, our myostatin levels are rising. And as our myostatin levels are rising, our muscle mass is diminishing. Well, one of the things that have been noted in the peer-reviewed literature is that Fortetropin actually inhibits myostatin. And by inhibiting myostatin, it helps with muscle mass. And there's been lots of studies on myostatin in null forms of mice and so forth. But basically, we want to control the myostatin in that slippery slope. As we're getting older, our ATP levels are dropping about 10% per decade. Our nitric oxide levels are dropping. Our melatonin levels are dropping. All these things are dropping. And lo and behold, sadly enough, at the same time, myostatin's rising and it's robbing us of our giddy up and go. And that, like, wow, it's so easy. I used to lift that with no problem. Like, that's awfully heavy. Now, if you add a surgery to that, or an injury of some sort, or a sedentary lifestyle, you've just accelerated that process. And most everybody on the call tonight, it knows the concept of biological aging and chronological aging. So I'm circling 60. I just turned 59, and I haven't exercised as much as I should have. I've traveled far too many times, and way too many hours writing and publishing and lecturing and so forth. And now I'm having to play regain. Isn't it better to sustain and maintain? And a good patient of mine, he's a perfect example. He's mid-70s. His name is Neil, and he's an Adonis. And as a male provider, I'm like, boy, he is great looking. Look at those biceps. Look at his shoulders. But he's never stopped exercising. I have another patient. He's in his mid-80s, and they're different than Donnie and Jeannie. And he actually is as hard as a rock. He still bench presses free weights, a couple 100 pounds of bench press free weight, is like remarkable. And it's because they've never stopped. But for us that have stopped, this is once again something we can incorporate to help fight that anabolic resistance, help with the protein synthesis management, as well as helping lower our myostatin levels. There was another study that was done on young athletes. I remember being a young athlete. Hard to believe now, but I used to be a sprinter and a hurdler and a big weightlifter.
Amazing.
And now I think I'm just big. And I love dad jokes. And so it's like, well, they showed that they increased muscle mass. So they did Fortetropin, and they did 19.8 grams or 6.6, so 6.6 versus 19.8. And they found both groups taking Fortetropin had increased lean body mass. But the one that was taking 3 times more had even more lean body mass. So they were doing a comparison that way, as well as you're doing, of course, the placebo-controlled studies as well. So it's compelling. But for us that love animals, kitty cats in our family, or dogs, they're actually using Fortetropin for animals. And if you've ever gone to your veterinarian, you know that it might be doxycycline for you. It might be doxycycline for your cat. And it's like, So the crossover on the animal studies, and they did a study on dogs that had tibial planing. And so they were laid up for a long period of time. So much like if I had injured my shoulder, I'm getting over a rotator cuff issue. And so, yes, I'm using Fortetropin as well, because I wasn't using it for about 3 to 6 months. It hurt to just stretch out or to do something, which I can now do as I'm waving my hands around like a good Greek. And we speak with our hands. And so it's like, wow, I'm now rehabilitating quicker. And so it's an augmentation for physical therapists, for occupational therapists, for us general practitioners. Here in Oregon, I got my DEA number. I do primary care and order my MRIs and CTs. In fact, I have a gentleman right now, which I'll go nameless for him because he's very, very well known. And he actually playing soccer, 55 years old, and has an additional tear in his cruciate ligament. He has a meniscus that's bulging. He's off to go get some stem cells and so forth. But obviously, I'm incorporating the exercise, the rehabilitation, the protein, making sure his anabolic hormones are good, and I'm incorporating Fortetropin. Right now, he just got done traveling to Mexico. Now he's in France. And so once he's done globetrotting, he's going to pick up his bottle at his front door and start taking it. So that's what he promised, at least.
I'm sure he'll do it. The research speaks to, why not? And one of my favorite statistics actually comes from that same UC Berkeley study that you referenced, where, there was an increase in protein muscle synthesis by 18% in older adults, even without exercise.
Yes. And that's remarkable. So now
Yeah.
imagine doing the diet and the lifestyle. And as I sit here with my Fortetropin and my other supplements and my mitochondrial support and my probiotics, it's like we supplement a good diet and lifestyle. And what's beautiful about Fortetropin is it's egg based, it's fertilized egg, it's been heavily researched, as you said, lots of peer review research. And it's like I'm just augmenting already my diet and lifestyle. And when you start noticing and feeling the difference and look in the mirror and say, okay, well, I can live with that more than I lived with it for a few weeks ago. I think that's good. I think that increase of protein synthesis is very, very important. Lowering the myostatin, very important. And I love the fact that you shared 18% gain. And on the myostatin, for those that are less familiar with that muscle area, they did a study of young and old and middle aged. And the older a person got, all things being equal, their myostatin levels rose. So we really want to lower that. And they found it rose the highest in frail women. And so over the course of time, of course, I've seen my mother get old. And now I've seen all my patients getting a little older, just like myself over the last 32, going on 33 years. And it's like, wow, what do frail women not want to do? Unless they're really, really brave and tenacious. They don't want to go outside during like an Oregon winter and slip and fall on a leaf, a wet pavement. And then they're going to have more frailness and more problems. And then, of course, osteoporosis gets worse because we're not doing weight bearing exercise. So it just dovetails beautifully as a great way to supplement a good diet and lifestyle is with something like Fortetropin and the diet and lifestyle.
And so what if patients want to learn more about Fortetropin or about supporting their muscle health, especially if they're on a GLP-1? What would you say to them?
Well, of course, you can visit MYOS MD. MYOS MD is for healthcare providers only. And so that's how you get MYOS MD and the Fortetropin. And so there's lots of, you can access the research, you can access the historical perspective. How did the food scientists come up with the delivery and the derivative of Fortetropin? And so I would say that, but for a consumer listening to this, talk to their doctor, talk to their healthcare provider of any persuasion. When I say doctor, that's very biased. Might be a nurse practitioner, might be a PA, might be a PT, OT, and onwards. And I've just written a big article nationally for chiropractic economics. I'll be coming out in a short while about even when you argue with the muscle will always win. And so not only do we get tight and stiff, but if you go to a chiropractor, osteopath, or another person doing body work and moving of subluxations in joints and tight muscles, you want those muscles to be healthy and resilient. And I think the example I given is a silly example because we're speaking to healthcare providers today. But I say, if I have my hand, it's a certain color. If I close my hand really tight, what color is it? Well, it's white. And so what happens is they're not getting circulation, the mitochondria, the tissues, extracellular matrix, all of that is becoming hypoxic because we're tight. We're tight, we're stiff, and we're getting weaker. So that perfusion through those 60,000 miles of blood vessels, the heart that beats 103,680 times a day, if you have an average pulse of 72 beats per minute, it's like, wow. And even if you think about the lymphatics, we never thought the lymphatics was anything other than a passive tube for our lymph. Well, we now know there's smooth muscle there too. So taking care of the skeletal muscle, the cardiac muscle, and all of this is really important.
Yes, definitely. And as we're coming up on time, what are the 3 key takeaways that you would like healthcare providers to know about preserving muscle mass in patients that are taking GLP-1s?
It doesn't have to. So first off, educate them, empower them. And there's lots of resources offered by MYOS MD on that note. The other thing is they're unaware because we all, just like with the channels on the news and the weather and politics, we only hear what we hear. And most of the important stuff we never hear. And so educating them that, hey, it's great, you're losing your muscle mass, you're losing your fat, but your success comes with a loss of muscle mass, which will make you more likely to yo-yo or boomerang back. And so tell them, hey, I'm going to support your process, whether it be bariatric, GLP-1, previous kinds of extreme fast weight loss. But we want you to be able to hold the ground you gained and as a result, Fortetropin and the exercise and the protein and the detox and all of this. But it just is something which otherwise you're just going to yo-yo. And I think of a young woman named Jennifer. When I say young, everybody's younger than me these days almost. And she's still in her mid 40s, but she had been on a previous HCG diet a decade ago, went from 248 pounds down to 157. Remarkable weight loss. And as a result, she ended up going ahead and having some tissues removed and other things because now she wanted everything to be more taut. And then immediately after stopping her extreme weight loss program, she gained it all back and then some. And I think that's a challenge. So let's tell our patients, let's do what you're going to do safely, methodically, but then let's not lose that benefit and that gain. Make sure you have the active metabolic tissue. Make sure you have that lean body mass. Very, very important.
And it's all about the lifestyle change. Like, how can we think about all the aspects of the whole person? You know, I'm an integrative pharmacist, so I'm always thinking about what are all the different aspects that make up someone's day? You know, what are they eating? How are they moving? Hopefully they're moving a little bit. And, you know, if so, like, what does that movement look like? Is there resistance training involved? You know, what stage of life are they in? All of these things are so important. And also, you know, if they're not getting it from their daily life, you know, maybe someone doesn't like doing really intense, you know, HIIT workouts and those sorts of things. Like, how can we supplement then in the way that it makes the most sense?
And I say we use our technology. I mean, I go for regular walks around our neighborhood. When I first started doing that after having moved several times in a year and a half, I was very deconditioned. I didn't want to do that. But when you're carrying around less weight, it's a great time to say, okay, I'm going to go do that because it's easier, and track it. Make a commitment for yourself. Put it on the schedule, just like we have every other thing which we do. It's all scheduled, either cognitively or on a schedule. It's like, okay, at 4 o'clock every day, I'm going to do. And when I was the dean at the Naturopathic University, I enacted back in the mid 90s walking meetings. I said, unless you folks need to be in front of your computer and you think you can get it done, you're allowed for, not allowed is a loose term, but you're encouraged to take a 15 to 20-minute walk and make it a walking meeting. And so this is, of course, where people stand on treadmills these days. They have standing desks. And I have a patient down in Texas, and he works in the baking industry, and he does not sit once during the day. So now, of course, we had to talk to him about having a good mat underneath his feet and his, you know, orthotics and, you know, structure. But yeah, once again, there's a lot of ways to sneak in exercise, and weight-bearing exercise is our friend because nobody wants osteoporosis.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time. I want to open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions about this topic in particular, anything that we can answer, this is your moment to put it in the chat, and we can answer it in the last few minutes.
I know one of the questions that has came up for me is I've had patients which we either food allergy tested, so true IgE, or food sensitivity tested. This is an egg yolk-based product. So if you know you're having an egg issue, it's probably not the product for you because that's going to be a problem. But that's the only contraindication I've seen. I know as a PharmD, your expansive knowledge on drug interactions and interactions with foods and all that. Do you see a problem? I'm going to kind of flip the script and ask you a question because I love my PharmDs. Because when I was a young doctor, I actually wrote my second or third book was on drug nutrient interactions. That's before the computer was so, and the databases. Do you see anything that causes you concern about somebody that wouldn't want to use this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day, if we really dissect, you know, what's in an egg and we think of all the different micronutrients and everything, there is a possibility, but at this point it's theoretical. You know, we don't have concrete data to say this is something that we specifically don't want for these patients. Generally, I would say someone who is, you know, not going to be eating egg products, they either are choosing that for personal reasons, for religious reasons, or because, you know, they have an IgE allergy.
Yeah, and I fully agree with you clinically, and that's my assessment too. Is if you're eating eggs, then Fortetropin is a perfect fit, and that's kind of my take. If you're avoiding eggs for some reason, then Fortetropin's not. But I think that's, and if you think about the general population, eggs are in so many baked items and other products. So Fortetropin has become something in my last 6 weeks of really introducing it to my patients, the number of patients that I educate, I share with them the peer-reviewed journal articles because my patients are generally geeks. I live right next to Intel and Nike, so they're high tech, and they might be PhDs in some other field other than medicine. Oh, but they eat this stuff up and they geek out. And I have a patient in Tennessee, and he's an executive for Nike and spent a lot of time in Asia, Vietnam, and Korea. He said, "Oh, send it all to me. I just love this stuff." And that's the beauty of when we as healthcare providers actually say, here's the science, because they're counting on us to do the vetting of it, but then to know with confidence, and here, you can read about it for yourself. And they're like, wow, this is good stuff.
Yes, definitely. So we do have a question in the chat. If someone is on a GLP-1, how can they maintain their muscle mass after concluding the GLP-1 regimen? So this would be for someone who's not taking GLP-1s long term and just looking to incorporate it for a short term. Will MYOS MD help following the use?
Oh, without a question. I use it during as well as after, but you could just, if a person stopped using it, and once again, the studies have shown that even if you're not doing anything actively, it's still going to help lower the myostatin and help improve the protein synthesis molecules. So I think it's a great addition because, and of course, exercise, because then of course you're going to build more muscle. But regardless, I think it's a great addition, whether you're on GLP-1, and once again, also applying that to bariatric surgery and other rapid weight loss programs. That's the problem. Rapid weight loss comes with a cost. The success is consequential. We detox a little too quickly, and we're losing way too much muscle mass.
Okay, thank you for the question. Amazing.
Excellent question.
All right. If there are no other questions, then we will wrap up. I think we can stay for about 1 more minute, see if there are any other questions. But otherwise, this was an amazing session. Thank you so much for your insight. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to one of us. You can do that via LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about the studies, please go to myosmd.com. So that's MYOSMD.com. All the studies are detailed there with hyperlinks and all the good stuff. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think that is all for now. We are available at any time for any sort of follow-up, again, via LinkedIn or via MyOSMD. Alrighty, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Swathi.
Oh no, I just saw a question come in.
Okay. Well, here I am. I'm back.
Yeah, no, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, so let's see. I've heard it can be beneficial for someone who has had an issue with bone and joint health problems.
Yes. And one of the things when we think of structure and function, they say structure begets function and function begets structure. And so if I look at my joint here, and if I have a joint issue, good, strong muscle to keep a joint in place and aligned. Always is kind of, I give this silly example. My poor patients over the years get all my little analogies and so forth. But if you have, let's say, a transmission and it's wobbly, well, that's a problem. So you want to have good housing to keep the joints in good alignment, and muscle's very important for that. Otherwise, the wobble happens. So, and that's actually what's happening, unfortunately, with my soccer player that's currently in France, is he has enough ligamental issues and muscle injuries because he's now been sidelined from his soccer that he's starting to lose it. Now he has more wobble. So yeah, it's very important for musculoskeletal health. So I incorporate with osteoporosis protocols, osteoarthritis protocols, and the like.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for the engagement and thank you for your insight today. And I think now we will officially close up, but we'll be back this time next month to chat again with another expert and to talk about how we can help patients in their muscle health journeys. All righty. Thank you. Bye-bye.